I am going to continue to be the doomsdayer of this podcast, though, because I am gearing up to go watch the 15-16 game losing streak Detroit Pistons come into Madison Square Garden tonight, where I've been given direction from our editorial desk to just write the scene of how dismal it is in Detroit, which I hate to be the Grim Reaper of an early young season with a team that was, had some expectations, but it's a mess right now, at least on the court. And there's definitely a lot of whispers about tensions behind the scenes within the franchise as well. And it's a tough experiment right now where it seems like there's not a congruent roster. You've got Isaiah Stewart playing your kind of stretch four role next to Jalen Duren, and you paid Stewart this summer pretty early in the extension cycle, all things considered. Like, I remember walking around the concourse of Thomas and Mack in Las Vegas during Summer League, and people were like, well, the Pistons just gave Isaiah Stewart this 4-year deal, and then they still have James Wiseman and Marvin Bagley on the bench, and it's a lot of tugging and pulling in different directions. And to speak on the injuries that we've continued to be kind of harping on this episode, it's not easy when Bojan Bogdanovic hasn't played a game yet, and he's just wearing very interesting sweaters on the bench every single game. But I don't know what a 35-year-old would have really been. Truly one of the better shooters in the league, especially a movement shooter. I wonder what different space and element that would provide, because right now it's really hard for the Pistons to get into a flow of steady offense. And they got stomped by the Wizards. That was the kind of Super Bowl of the bottom of the standings this past week, where I don't have the schedule in front of me, but if you want to look at, I don't want to mess with my fancy recording setup here and potentially ruin everything and all the great work people are doing behind the glass. But there's just been a lot of talk about the Pistons maybe potentially to struggle winning a game for the rest of 2023. Not the 23-24 season, but all of December. And look, I was on the ground floor. I was up there close and personal for all the Sixers process years. And it's starting to give me that type of like nadir energy where you're at rock bottom. It can't get any worse than this. It truly can't. I mean, they're pushing historic levels of losing streaks here. So, and I don't have confidence they're going to beat the gritty and grimiest New York Knicks that are now going to be pissed off that they're the lowest ranked team in the odds of the NCAA tournament. They're going to prove it to Vegas wrong tonight against the Pistons. But yeah, I am curious to get a sense of them in person. I have not seen them play yet this year. I actually have not ever seen Cade Cunningham play live. And I was excited for this season because he was apparently like far and away the best player of the USA select team that was scrimmaging against the senior team, if you will, that went to Manila. And there was, a lot of talk from people who were in that gym that maybe he was the best player on the floor in games that included Anthony Edwards and Tyrese Halliburton and Jalen Brunson and guys like that who were definitely on the rise. So I was hoping to see what that would do. And he's having a great year. He's having a great year, but it's so hard for him to find easy looks. It's hard for anyone there to find easy looks, to the point where I saw someone flame the Pistons Twitter account last night for tweeting out a highlight of Killian Hayes dribbling into a mid-range pull-up. It was like, if your team account is posting these highlights, that's how you know exactly where things go. So anything else you want to say about Vinny Goodwill's Detroit Pistons, Dan?
First off, yeah, I envy Vinny in a lot of ways, his sneaker collection, the wonderful setup that he's got there. I do not envy that his local is the Pistons. That's a tough hang. A couple of things. First off, I don't care, man. I'll mess up my camera shot to look up information on during the course of the podcast. The longest in-season losing streak in NBA history, 26 games shared by those process era Sixers in 2014 and the Cleveland Cavaliers post LeBron leaving the first time in 2010. So
pre-Kyrie, as I like to look at it.
That's right, pre-Kyrie. Before, so still a ways for these Pistons to go to get to the absolute depths of historic issues. But you mentioned the schedule, so yeah, they got the Knicks tonight, and then it's home for the Cavs, home for the Grizzlies on December 6th. So that's, circle that one as a potential get right game, I guess. At Orlando versus the Pacers, home and home for the Sixers, at the Bucks, at the Hawks, home for the Jazz 4 days before Christmas, maybe that, home and home with the Nets, at the Celtics, and then versus Toronto. So that's how they end December. There's not a gimme in that bunch, even if you are not already as bad as the Pistons are. So it's a tough road. And yeah, I don't want to, there's many sources of concern in the construction, the way that Troy Weaver has put together the roster, the way that, Monty Williams is managing that roster, it's in search of the culture that he's looking for, the space that they're trying to create, all those sorts of things, the balancing toughness and offense, and how do you navigate all of that? There's a lot to figure out. But I think the biggest thing in year 4 of this rebuild, the biggest thing to really care about most is, to what degree is this context failing Cade Cunningham? And to what degree is this about Cade Cunningham? I'm not saying I have the answer to that, but I think it's the biggest question to consider for the Pistons because he's playing in some of the most desperate for spacing lineups in the entire league. He's got nowhere to go most nights. Like, chances are you freeze frame a pick and roll and you see him come off and there's going to be 3 people in his face because they are not worried about anything else. And the size, the feel, the vision, all that kind of stuff, like, you don't just give up on that. But I don't mean this to sound mean, especially because, as you mentioned, they're my New York Knicks, right? But the principle or the idea of, as a prospect, Cade, it was like, well, that's Luka. And in practice, the reality has been a little bit more like, what if the Knicks just gave the ball to RJ Barrett for the first 3 years of his career? Like, there's not the burst, there's not the explosion, there's not the shot creation, the getting to the line, the ability to elevate a floor that you need if you're going to be one of those number 1 table setters. And I think Cade can be that. But there hasn't been a whole lot of evidence of it. So let's go with a couple of numbers here, a couple of just sort of context aspects. Below average finisher, significantly below average for a big wing every year of his career, about like 52% finishing at the rim this year. Just not good enough. 33% shooting from the beyond the arc, has never been above, has never made more than a third of his threes, not a pull-up threat. So everyone can go under on screens on him and just continue to congest the half court, pack the paint. 3rd lowest free throw attempt rate of any high usage player in the league this season. The only ones lower, Kyle Kuzma, because he's putting them up. It doesn't matter if he's getting into the paint to do it. And LaMelo, same thing, because he's just going to pull up. And so if you are not consistently generating high volume looks at or high quality looks at the rim, you're not cashing in the ones that you get, you're not threatening a defense as a pull-up 3-point shooter or as really any kind of 3-point shooter, because you're not a catch and shoot option because the ball's in your hands all the time, and you're not getting to the free throw line a ton, it's so hard to be a driver of high efficiency offense or even average efficiency offense. And you see that because the Pistons are bad on offense every year. And so there's nature versus nurture. There's content, you're trying to solve these questions, but the solution, the nature of the question is getting pretty important, because after this season, he is eligible for an extension of that rookie deal. And maybe the answer is just you max him out because he was the number 1 pick in the draft. He is the lifeline to whatever you hope to be. You've seen enough in some stretches, and there's the context of he missed most of last year with an injury. And you just sort of like, well, we're paying because it's the fund max, as Brian Windhorst calls it, the 25% max. It's not going to be onerous on our books, and we're going to figure it out. And in 2 years' time, it's going to look like a steal because we're going to put the right context around him. But I would understand some trepidation in doing it, is all I'm saying, because we have not seen evidence.
Not to interrupt you. That's what the Bulls thought about Zach LaVine. And here we are a couple years later.
Yeah, like, you are accepting it's faith in things that are not in evidence yet. Like, if you believe he can be the elevator of an offense, we just have not seen that yet. And maybe it's because of the spacing. Maybe it's because of Bojan Bogdanovic being out. Maybe it's because they're trying to just jam every center that somebody else didn't like into a rotation. But at some point, you need to see Cade Cunningham be the guy that lifts that floor up. And so far, we have not seen it. So that to me, the entire rest of the season, win, lose, or draw, it needs to be about answering that question. Can you put something in place to help answer that question about Cade Cunningham? Because nothing else really matters if that one doesn't get figured out.
Yeah, the biggest side effect I learned through my 3 years of reporting on tanking is that when you do this and you continue to collect top guys at the top of the draft year after year after year, all of a sudden you look up and it's year 4 of the rebuild, to your point, Dan, and you have to start paying dudes who have not proven to be capable of together winning basketball games yet. And it could potentially put you in just a debilitating hamstring down the line when their salary is not commensurate with what the winning expectation should be of those dollar figures.